Theater. Visit hennepintheatertrust.org for tickets.
We are back. Stan Turner with you here. Thank you so much for your company. We're having a great time reminiscing with a good friend of mine and yours, Joe Schmidt, the valued and much admired and loved sportscaster at Channel 5. Eyewitness News, KSDP, located on University Avenue, what Steve Cannon used to call the Boulevard of Broken Hearts, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple of broken careers along the way, too.
Well, it's kind of the business. That
is the nature of the beast, isn't it?
But, you know, you sit there, you look, you were there 30 years, and I've been there,
34, actually.
On and off, almost 30 years now. And, it's to survive in the business is one thing, but to survive in, a very competitive market like this is, I feel very fortunate.
So do I. So did I, absolutely. We want to talk about your book for sure here, Silent Impact, Stories of Influence Through Purpose, Persistence, and Passion. Joe Schmidt's recent book. It's out there right now. You can find it, that old cliche again, good things come in small packages. It's not a big or a thick book, but it's a wonderful book. It's got a lot of content, a lot of meat and potatoes in there. I love your stories. It's all anecdotal. And you've given us the go-ahead to talk about some of these things. I want to let's talk about, we are the St. Paul Saints station right here. KLBB carries the Saints game, as you well know, Joe.
Yes,
you certainly
I do
now. And Mike Veck, crazy Mike, he can never be accused of being overly subtle, can he?
No. He's a great promoter and a great guy, and I do have a story about Mike and his family in the book.
You do.
Do you want me to share it?
Let's do that. Mike Veck is a bigger-than-life guy, as you say, a promotional genius. His father, Bill, before him.
Right.
His father put a 3-foot 8-inch guy up to bat one time, didn't he, with the White Sox or something in his...
Eddie Goodell, and his number was 1/8. And that baseball uniform is in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
There was nothing the Vecks wouldn't do or won't do. But in his personal life, Mike Veck and his wife Libby had a real challenge. Their daughter Rebecca. It's the subject of one of your anecdotes. Tell us about it.
I was doing an event with Mike one night, and I had worked with Mike and have done things with Mike for years since he bought the Saints, and I could tell he was off his game. And I said, Mike, what's up? And he said, I just found out my daughter's going blind. He had an 11-year-old daughter at the time. Her name was Rebecca, and they found out she had retinitis pigmentosa. A long story short, Mike let me document the family's struggle through this, going to the doctors. They found out that...
Excuse me, by document, you mean with the Channel 5 crew. You are videotaping this for a story to be put on the air. Okay,
right. And so we did it. And Mike, at first, both Mike and Libby had to think about it because we were going to get very personal with them, but then they thought this might help. They wanted to raise money and awareness for this disease. Well, as it turned out, they found out that people who have sight and lose sight remember everything in vivid detail when they lose their sight eventually. So they decided they had to take her to places they wanted her to see before she couldn't see. Yes. And they took her to the Baseball Hall of Fame where her grandfather is in there. And they took her to the Grand Canyon, and they took her to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments and so forth. And we were down in Florida one time where Mike literally put an 11 or 12-year-old girl at the time on his lap with a convertible and let her drive in the parking lot of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. And he said, this is probably not good parenting, but she will never know what it's like to drive a car. And I want her to have that feeling. Oh. And it was just amazing how they took this very negative situation and made something positive. They knew what the reality was, but to see their courage under fire was incredible. And later on, when I got diagnosed with lymphoma and cancer, when I was battling it, I remembered how the Becks fought that and how graceful they were and how Mike used humor, to keep him positive when things were around him very negative. Right. And I used that. So I tell that story. Great guy, great family.
And there's a footnote and a big one to the story. You and Joe Caffrey, who worked with you on the story, a fine photographer, editor, you guys won an Emmy Award, didn't you, for that report?
We won an Emmy, and Joe and I looked at each other, and without almost saying anything, we sent it to Rebecca, because we thought this was her Emmy, it was her story.
That's a beautiful
We just
story.
had to get out of the way of it, and we're not trying to be heroes on it, but it just made sense, and it made us feel better.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. This kind of connects to the next story. Joe Mauer,
yes.
and an act of kindness and friendship. I'll be the first to admit, I sit around grousing about, I think the guy makes $23 million a year. And by all accounts, he's a very nice guy. I've never met him, but I've heard from people who know him. He is a genuinely nice kid, as they call him. But I could sit in a hot tub for $23 million a year all season, too.
Yeah.
and I'd be just delighted to take the paycheck. But so yeah, little sour grapes there, Joe, on my part. But there are elements to the man. Obviously, a gifted athlete,
right?
A very nice man, a good role model, actually.
Yep.
When he's out on the playing field, not in the hot tub.
Well, it's first of all on Joe. The one thing I've figured out on Joe is I don't think people dislike Joe. I think they dislike the contract. The fact
I think you're right about that.
I think the fact that he signed that contract, and he signed it at the height of his career when he had the best year ever, and everybody expected that would be the number for the next 8 years of his contract.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, reality comes in, and it's not, and he's had some injuries. So maybe as fans we.
That's well said. I think that, I'll give you that. Maybe it is the contract we hate most. When Morneau was with the team, those two guys ate up most of the payroll, didn't they? That was it. They couldn't afford to hire pitchers. Huh? No wonder they stink.
And you blame them. I mean, and here's the one thing that I think about, and I think you can relate to this, Stan, because you've been in the business, and when you're in the public eye, you can get criticized. When we were on TV, not like a Joe Mauer did, but there were times we had to take some heat, whether it was an email or a disgruntled person thinking we're wrong. And it's okay if they're coming at you, but when your family's involved, that's where I feel bad for the Mauer family because they know Joe's a great guy. They know he's working hard, yet people are saying all this negative stuff about him, and it's like it. And I know that bothers Joe more than it does coming at him.
I believe that. And your book shines a very bright light on one of, I'm sure, of many facets of the really good side of Joe Mauer. And this is something I didn't know about till I read your book.
I tell the story about how when Joe was a senior at Creighton-Durham Hall High School, every day after his fourth-hour class, he walked a special needs student who was blind to the lunchroom and sat him down at his table. Now, Joe Mauer sat at the coolest table in Creighton-Durham Hall. You got to realize this guy was the best high school athlete Minnesota ever produced. He was getting full-ride scholarships from all the major football programs. He was an all-state basketball player, the very first player chosen in the Major League Baseball draft. Joe was a big man on campus. So Joe would walk this kid by the name of Mike Hawley and sit him down at the table. And I asked Joe, I said, why'd you do it? And he said, because it was the right thing to do. So then I started thinking, okay, I'm writing this book on silent impact. We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. So I found Mike Hawley, the blind student. And I asked Mike, I said, 13 years later, I said, Mike, what did this mean to you? And he said it was great. He had never had a friend who was an athlete before. He said, they didn't bully me, but he goes, they ignored me and shunned me, and I think they were a little afraid of me because they didn't know who I was. Well, they found out he was a big sports fan, and every day at lunch they talked sports. And he was an encyclopedia. If somebody wanted to know how many points Kevin Garnett had the night before, they would ask Mike. Well, by the end of the first semester, Joe would always walk Mike to his next class. By the end of the first semester, the kids would fight over who got to walk Mike to the next class.
Wonderful.
And then I tell the story. One of the kids told me this amazing story. He said, Wednesdays was pizza day at Creighton-Durham Hall High. And Mike would invariably spill crumbs all over his clothing, have pizza sauce in his chin or his cheek. Joe would grab a napkin, nonchalantly wipe Mike off, brush him off, to make sure he looked good for his next class. By the end of the first semester, all these kids were doing this.
Oh.
These are high school kids. They're the most selfish creatures on God's green earth. You know?
But I don't know. There's something about guys named Joe. Joe Mauer, Joe Schmidt. Pretty good folks. So.
Now that in a nutshell is silent impact. And to this day, when I found the 6 guys who sat around that table, and when I talked to them, it was like it happened yesterday.
Really?
And a lot of these stories that I find, and I'll talk to these people, they remember what they wore. They remember what color the wall was. They remember. I mean,
that's how important that episode is to them.
Yeah, still. And I've got a bunch of those stories like that. And it also then makes you realize, okay, I have to be more aware of the impact that I have on other people. And then we, on top of it, Stan, we did some research. We researched some companies because I do talk to companies, and I really believe that influence is not a soft skill. You need to be influential if you want to lead. You need to be influential if you want to have friends and so forth. Influence is a skill we all need. And we took it out to 10 companies. One of the questions we asked is, if there were a going away party tomorrow night, who would the most people show up for? Because that person is a person of influence. And we didn't always find that person in the corner office. Sometimes they were the person who cleaned the corner office. But when we found that person, that's why the book is broken down into 3 categories. When we found that person, they had 3 traits in common: purpose, persistence, and passion. And that's how the book is broken down into 3 different areas in silent impact. And it's it's just worked out great because all of a sudden the stories aligned right in these three areas.
They do fall perfectly there. Silent impact stories of influence through purpose, persistence, and passion. Joe Schmidt is the author. Joe Schmidt is our guest. We're so happy to have you, my friend. Great to see you. How ironic that it should be, after not seeing each other for a long, long time,
I know.
years, 2 days in a row. Last night at Jason Davis's retirement bash, and now you had been scheduled on this show before that, so it's a happy coincidence.
It really is.
And it's lovely dipping into your book here. And again, we're not stealing the thunder. We're really we're whetting the appetite because you've got so many fine anecdotes and vignettes in here that illustrate the importance of what you call silent impact. I love the story about Sister Helen, the nun, out in west central Minnesota. Can you tell that one? This will get you in the heart.
And this is interesting because I had heard this story. And I thought, since I was doing my stories on a lot of Minnesota folks, I thought, well, I got to find this nun. And I found the nun in the Brainerd Dispatch. I found her obituary. And her name was, she actually went by Sister Carmela, but I call her Sister Helen in the book because her name was Helen Marosla. And a long story short, she was teaching third grade in a Catholic school in Little Falls when a student walked in and his name was Mark Eklund. Well, Mark Eklund was kind of a troubled kid, a little bit. I mean, talked a lot. They had some fun. She actually put Scotch tape over his mouth to try to get him to shut up, and it didn't work. Several years later, Mark was now she was now teaching math in high school. So into her class walks Mark Eklund, a little taller, a little more handsome, still a little bit of a troublemaker. And anyway, one week, Sister was trying to teach the class a new math concept, and nobody understood the concept, so she knew she had to change the atmosphere and the culture of the classroom. So she had everybody take out a sheet of paper. They thought, oh, here we go, Stan. We got a
pop quiz.
Yeah, pop quiz. And she said, no. She goes, you guys know each other. You all went to Catholic school for all these years. I want you to write down everybody's name on the left-hand side of the column. And on the right-hand side of the column, I want you to write down the nicest thing you can say about each and every one of your classmates.
The nicest thing?
The nicest thing.
Okay.
So the kids spent the rest of the hour doing it. And over the weekend, Sister compiled everybody a list. And on Monday, she handed it out, and all of a sudden, the culture changed, the attitude changed. Soon this math concept that nobody understood was understood by all. Sister thought it was the end of the story. Fast forward a few years, and she comes back from vacation, and she finds out that Mark Eklund had been killed in the Vietnam War, and his funeral was the next day, and the family wanted her to show up. So she went to the funeral, and at the funeral, a young soldier came up to her and said, "Were you Mark's math teacher?" And she said, yes, I was. He said, I served with Mark in Vietnam. He talked about you often. Sister was stunned. A little bit later at the family farm, the father and mother of Mark Eklund approached Sister Helen, and they wanted to show her something. They said the Army had sent back Mark's belongings. They pulled out of a plastic bag a wallet, opened it up, and out of it they pulled a tattered, crinkled piece of paper with yellowed Scotch tape on it. It was the list. Mark had carried the list with him to his dying day. Then others around said, I still have my list. All the classmates were around. One pulled it out of his wallet. Another one said they had their sock drawer. One said it was in their wedding album. They all had their list. And Sister Helen released this story and was kind of somewhat embarrassed that it kind of became a national story. And I saw it, I think, in Chicken Soup for the Soul or something. And then I thought, well, let me find these people. So I put my reporter's hat on, and I found 6 of the people who were Mark Eklund's classmates.
Oh, wonderful.
And then I found out that the lessons that Sister Helen taught back then, and the lessons were pretty simple. They were, you can always find something nice to say about somebody, and praise more, condemn less. But they all remembered what was on their list. You know, one lady said that she was a good student, a loyal friend, and she had nice long legs. Another one said she was funny. She had luscious lips. So we know the hormones were raging for at least one of the kids in Sister Helen's class.
Yes.
But they all remembered what was on the list, and they all still had the list, and they all tried to teach the lessons of Sister Helen onto their children and now to their grandchildren. And it's just amazing the power of the silent impact that list had and how it lives on. Once again, something very small. We make our biggest impressions when you're not trying to be impressive, and the power can be so profound and contagious, and it can last forever. And I do these, so I go out and I'll tell these stories and I'll do these speeches, and I've got it all organized, and it works out really well at these conferences and so forth. Then I have people come up to me and tell me their stories.
Wonderful.
I did a speech for a bunch of Wendy's franchisees owners and general managers. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, I need to share